Hi, my name is Sarah Thelwall and I set up MyCake and I also run the Culture Benchmark. And for the fourth year running, we've taken the full release of the Arts Council England annual data set, i.e. the data on the national portfolio, and we've taken that enormous spreadsheet and turned it into something that we think is a bit easier to read. We hope you do too. It's set up as a dashboard, and this short video is just to introduce you to it. You'll find on this front page a quick discussion of what it is, plus my contact details. You'll see on the second tab a quick explanation of how these various filters work. I'm going to show that to you in a minute. We've got a summary page with a bit of income, some attendance data and some museums information. My favourite page that I'm going to spend some time on in this video that looks at where the money comes from. The balance to that is, of course, what you spend the money on, so all the different classes of that, some audience data, and finally some charting facilities. So, what is this and how is it useful to an individual arts organisation? Well, what we're trying to do with this income page is to ask the question of where does the money come from and how does that vary according to the art form, the geography, or the turnover range. And by the way, in the paid for version of this, which is the princely sum of 60 quid including VAT, you can have an individual comparison as well. And what these filters set up is a comparison between the national average in these middle two columns, a selected sample, so let's pick visual arts, in these left two columns, and then if you've got it, your individual organisation on the right. And what I think this is good for is to say, well, how does my region, art form, size of organisation compare to the national average, and how is that similar or different, and what accommodations should I be making when I'm setting my goals for the future? So I'm just going to use this income information as a way of exploring that, but you can do the same with the expenditure and the audience data as well. And really this is about giving you a general steer. If you want super detailed audience information, you're going to be better off going to the audience agency than you are with this, because this is just headlines. And equally, if you want lots of detail on income and expenditure, we've got much more of that in the Culture Benchmark. But as a either free or cheap tool, I think this has got some use as well. So let's look at this visual arts as an example. Where's the money coming from? Well, across the national average and indeed across the visual arts, the single biggest source of income is Arts Council regular funding, so core funding. Now that's across 140 organisations in the visual arts who have an average turnover of just over $1 million, whereas in that national average I can tell you it's 698 organisations and an average turnover of 2.5 million. So across all of that, consistently the core money from the Arts Council is the single biggest source of income. Second biggest is the earned income from the core activities. In the national average, that's 25.9% of turnover. In the visual arts, it's a slightly lower 20.8% of turnover. The third largest source of income is local authorities, so that's 11.3 in the national average and 12.1 in visual arts. So there's one or two variations in there, although they're not too stark. We'll see a little bit more change in here in the lottery work, but they're not enormously different figures. So how could we look at something that is perhaps shows a little greater variation? Well, I'm going to put in a figure here so that we only look at some smaller organisations. So what this is now doing is we're back to all sectors, all geographic regions, but only organisations with a maximum turnover of 200,000. That's 130 organisations and their average turnover is 139,000. And here we really start to see some substantial differences. As might be expected, smaller organisations are often more dependent on Arts Council money, and that's definitely true in here, with an average of 57.6% of turnover by comparison to the national average of 36.9%. They also achieve a smaller percentage of their turnover from their earned income from core activities, 19.2 versus 25.9. Interestingly, they're not really seeing any more money as a percentage of turnover from their local authorities. And actually, they're doing pretty well when it comes to trusts and foundations. They're beating the average ever so slightly. And they're also beating the average for sponsorship, which I think is worth noting. But the thing that's really making a difference is that they're clearly developing, because they're seeing a lot more lottery project money and development money and other forms of Arts Council revenue income. So what this says to me is, if you're a small organisation with a turnover of less than 200,000 and you're thinking about what the future balance of your types of turnover should be, it would be more appropriate to compare yourself to peers of a similar size, because these figures set a more realistic goal for the percentage of grant dependency than the national average does. And that's just one example to illustrate the usefulness of making more specific comparisons that have been tailored to the details of your organisation by sector, by region, by turnover band, and how that can add to your knowledge rather than simply taking the headlines that you will see in a report, because of course the challenge is you can't put everything into a report. So the second point that I'd make here is that nobody writing a report is ever going to know all of the details of what you need to make your arguments. But if we can use this data in its full release format, then it allows us to explore the things that you need this week. For, this week you might be looking at, well, what should we be doing with donations? Well, if you're small, the goal is anything more than 2.3% is pretty good. And if you can get up to 4.2, you're hitting the national average, for example. Whereas the following week, you might be looking at what else should we be doing with trusts and foundations. So this is the sort of tool that can give you a general steer and a ballpark within which to base some basic assumptions when putting together budgets and plans. And you can also use these as a leaping off point for discussions with funders, with fundraisers you might be working with other forms of income and entrepreneurial support, etc., etc. So it's a start point. It's not a black and white, but it's the sort of thing that should support discussions. And of course, I am more than happy to talk to you about this at great length, in which case do give me a call or drop me a line to these details here. And of course, we've got lots more data in the Culture Benchmark that goes into much more detail than this. But for now, enjoy. Thank you. Bye.